Welcome to Ice Cream with Authors, the podcast that brings mini author visits straight to your home or car. I'm Becca Werwell, one of your hosts and award-winning author of the Road Trip Rescue series.
And I'm Amanda Trumpauer, your other host. I write for Jesus lovers who dig dragons, detectives, and droids.
Imagine sitting down with your favorite scoop of ice cream and chatting with the authors who write the stories you love. That's exactly what we do here. Whether you're a kid or a grown-up who loves faith-filled chapter books and middle-grade adventures, this is the place for you.
Each episode, we dive into delightful conversations with inspiring Christian writers, discovering new books and sweet stories that nourish the soul. So grab your ice cream, get cozy, and let's share a treat together. Our guest today is Ryan Southworth. Ryan lives in Cincinnati with his wife, Kyna, and their 2 children. In addition to his writing, Ryan teaches history, literature, and Latin at Charis Classical Academy. Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here. Before we go any further, Ryan, we wanted to ask, what is your favorite ice cream flavor?
So, as writers, I'm sure you're going to agree that the best ice creams have the most adjectives. So, chocolate is okay, but dark chocolate swirl is better.
Sure.
And then dark brownie bomb with swirls of peanut butter chocolate ice cream. That's
Very
the best.
descriptive.
So, more adjectives, the better. I like mint chocolate chip, but, mint Oreo cookies and cream is even better.
I love that. I've never thought of the fact that the best ice cream flavors have more and more adjectives, but you are so correct. That is
It's
very
true.
true. Yeah.
More descriptive. All right, Ryan, could you tell us about your Treeborn trilogy and the first book, Mapeline?
Yeah, so there's Mapeline and Ceylon and The Last Tower are the 3 books, and they are about a little people who live in a giant wilderness. It's a fantasy world, so it's not on Earth. It's its own place. And these little people are about knee-high, and they are sort of mysteriously connected to the trees they live in. So Mapeline comes from a maple tree. And so, her hair changes with the seasons like a maple tree does, and then falls out in the winter time, so she's bald all winter like all maple trees. Ceylon is from a cinnamon tree, and there's magnolia trees, and so they all have kind of characteristics that are connected to the trees they live in. But Mapeline and some of her friends are discovering that there are some strange things happening in the wilderness. The weather is unusually aggressive and dangerous. The animals around them are behaving sort of strangely. And so book 1 sort of introduces those problems, and then they spend the trilogy kind of figuring out what's going on. And so
That sounds delightful and such a rich world. Although I have an embarrassing confession to make. I was not aware that cinnamon came from a tree.
well, see, it's educational as well.
It is educational. I actually really don't like cinnamon, so that's probably why I didn't know that. But that's really interesting.
You don't like cinnamon?
I like cinnamon.
I know, it's weird. Literally everybody likes cinnamon.
What about a cinnamon sugar soft pretzel?
We might have to end this podcast. I'm not sure.
It'll make you guys uncomfortable.
Yeah, so if you go to if you were to buy a fancy cinnamon, sometimes they will specifically say Ceylon cinnamon because it is one of a couple species of cinnamon trees. And it's the bark. Yeah.
I didn't know that either, actually, to be fair, but I do like cinnamon.
So his kind of tree thing is he smells like Christmas all the time because he smells like cinnamon.
Oh, that would be a good thing to make you unique for sure.
Yeah, and not, it talks about in the book that, normally you don't want to be known for your smell. But in the case of Ceylon, it's okay.
It's acceptable. I love that.
That's awesome. So this sounds so fun, Ryan. I'm curious, how did you get started writing this series? Why this series, and how has it grown over time from how it started?
Yeah, so my kids now, they're both actually high school next year. I have a 9th and a 10th grader. And my daughter, who is currently 15, when she was 3, she liked bears, and I wanted to write her a short story because I had always kind of written and was interested in writing. And so I sat down to write her a short story, and she was a little girl and liked bears. So that's what the story was, a little girl and a bear named Rolf. And the short story, she liked it, of course, because she's my kid and I feed her and stuff like that. So she kind of has to like it, I guess. But she liked it, and so I wrote another short story and another one, and I liked them. I liked how they were turning out, and so eventually those short stories started getting woven together into what became book one,
Mm.
Maple. And so that was like a 10-year process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the primary homeschool parent, so I was homeschooling my kids and often just writing on Saturdays, and so picked away at it for a long time. When that got accepted for publication, the publisher wanted a trilogy, and so the other two books came much quicker,
Mm-hmm.
partly because I had a deadline, but partly just because I knew that they were going to be read and published, and that was really
Mm-hmm.
motivating. And so the story actually came very easily and quickly, probably, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years to finish the other two.
What I really like about that is it's not uncommon to hear from authors that your first book takes a while, right? Maybe it's because you're learning the craft, or maybe it's because you're in a season of life where it's not necessarily your primary focus, like in your case being the primary homeschool parent. And I have experienced this myself, having young children that I'm actively homeschooling at the beginning of the process. And one of the things that I'm learning, it really is okay because God has a plan and God has seasons for your life. And just because you're interested in something in particular doesn't necessarily mean every season that's going to be your priority. You can still do it. It may just not be the priority. And it's okay to trust him, and it's okay to keep faithfully working on it like you did with Mapeline over those 10 years. And the time will come when it's a more appropriate focus. So I really love like that was your experiences, and that's what you can kind of show kids now when you stand in front of them and hold your book.
Yeah, and also that, the goal of writing is not only publication. When I started, I wasn't writing to be published. I
Right.
was writing for short story for my kids. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that would have been fine if it had never gone to the next step too.
Shared a little bit about what makes these tree-born characters unique. What are some of the traits that they have that help make them relatable to real life kids?
Yeah, so we had mentioned in our kind of pre-podcast discussion that the narrator is a little bit unique in that he is not just telling the story, but he occasionally is talking to the readers as well. He's talking to the audience. And so what I found as I was writing about all these kids and what they do, I was remembering now as an adult what it was like to be a kid. And you can remember all those boring days. There's a chapter about boring winter days where it's too cold to do anything, or, spats between siblings over certain things, or jealousy, or being scared, just like kid stuff, like things that kids are experiencing. And it was really helpful and interesting to me to remember that as an adult now. And so the narrator, he's sharing the story of these kids, but he's also sort of reflecting with an adult's maturity, being like,
Mm.
oh, you probably know what this is like, and it's like other things, and connecting it to other things in life. And that sounds very like non-narrative. It's just kind of woven into the story as the narrator is telling the story. But that for me, I was remembering and kind of re-experiencing what it was like to be a kid.
Mm.
And so I hope that makes the kids very authentic. I hope they read authentic. But then it's also useful as an adult not to just have an adult mind, but to be
Mm.
like, I remember what that was like.
Yeah.
And I could gloss over that and be like, well, that's silly and foolish. Or I could be like, I remember how powerful that emotion was for a kid.
Mm.
And it felt super important at the time. And that's part of the story. So I hope that kids, as they read it, are helped to kind of reflect on, like, I do feel that way.
Mm.
Or I did have that experience.
When I was reading, it felt like this warm, friendly, grandfatherly type voice that
Mm-hmm.
was telling the story. And he's there to tell a story. He's not there to like wag his finger at the kids and be like, you
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing this. But he's there to
Yeah.
relate to them and to just see them and understand them.
Yeah, and as you're talking, it reminds me why I love reading middle grade and chapter books as an adult, too. I mean, part of it obviously is that I write for this age, but when you're kids, you can read this and you can see, oh, look, I've gone through this. I can connect with this emotion. But as adults, we can also read and remember remember how strong those emotions were, remember situations we went through. So as authors, it is important for us to be able to think of how our readers will relate, because we might be writing for 12-year-olds, but none of us are 12. So to be able to remember what some of those experiences were, I think is really important. And one of the good things to consider while we're working on a children's book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the things that I really hope that the book does is to connect with the kids on that level, but also be pleasant for the parents to be reading as they're like to connect with the narrator and also remember what it was like to be a kid. Also maybe even, see their kids from a slightly different angle as they're reading it. And you said you enjoy reading middle grade. I think parent, there are books that you read to your kids because they want you to, and so you suffer through it because they want you to read this book and like it's sort of painful and you'd really rather be poking your eyes out, but you're going to read this book. And then there's other books that you pick up and as you read them, you're like, wow, this is like really pleasant to read. And what I hope that Mapeline and the other books do is that it's a pleasant experience for the parent to read and not just for the kid.
So in just a moment, we're going to play an excerpt from chapter 1 of Mapeline, so you can listen into this for yourself. But first, Ryan, I have one more question. Your cover is really fun. It's attention grabbing. We have our main character, Mapeline. I'm looking at the book 1 cover. She's got her bow and arrow, and there's a bear in the background. So just a lot going on that really gets my attention, at least. And so I'm curious, did you learn anything while working with the cover designer for this book?
Yeah, a ton. I had no idea how you would design a cover. So we obviously got an artist, so it would look good. If I would have done it, it would not have. So we got an artist, but the publisher also just really guiding that process to realize that, so one of the first drafts of the cover was Mapeline and Rolf sort of lazing happily by a tree, smiling. And the publisher immediately said, well, that's no good. You can't have, she didn't actually say in these words, but like, you can't have happiness on the cover. Like, happiness does not make people say, what's going on here? You need some fear or curiosity, like something going on that makes people say, I want to open this and see what's happening. And so the evolution of the cover from kind of that light, happy end of the book scene to a scene kind of in the middle. Mapeline's kind of looking off screen and she has a bow, and Rolf the bear looks very serious. And that makes a much bigger impression on something happens in this book serious and that matters, and I want to find out what's going on. So that was super. And I'm super pleased with that cover. It does all those things. And one of my big author perks was getting the big, banner thing, that stretches up and it's like taller than me of Mapeline with her bow. Like, oh, that's super cool. And I think it does attract people to it.
Well, I think it is high time to let the kids hear a little bit about the book itself. So we're going to pause to listen to an excerpt from chapter 1 of Mapeline.
Chapter 1. An Unusual Holiday. Mapeline was a child, very much like yourself. Well, perhaps not so very much. Unless you live in a deep, vast wilderness of forests and rivers and streams. Unless you sleep in a small room, hung high up in the limbs of an old maple tree. Unless you stand no taller than my kneecap and have hair that changes with the seasons, you are not so very much like Mapeline. She was a tree-born, and if you saw her you would think, isn't she a pretty little girl? But somehow, and you would feel silly saying it, somehow she makes me think of a tree. Not very much, but still. I'm sure no one would think the same if they saw you now, would they? But if you are very curious, and sometimes scared, and sometimes brave, if you love to be outdoors with the sun on your back and the wind through your hair, of whatever sort, and find yourself drawn to cool water on hot days and warm, furry blankets on cold ones, then you are more like Mapeline than anyone looking at the two of you might guess. And Mapeline had many friends, just as I'm sure you do. There was Briar from the maple tree alongside her own, and Nettle from the fir tree across the way, and though they were older and tended to spend more time with her brother, Nut and Thatch Birch were friendly more often than not. But Mapeline's best friend was Rolf. Rolf, I am afraid, was nothing like any of your friends, or mine. In fact, even if you knew a bear who was of the same enormous size and midnight black fur and wet, often sniffly nose, you would not come much closer to having a friend like Mapeline's, for her friend was a bear who could talk. This, of course, for Mapeline's world, as for our own, was not normal. Talking animals were few and far between in the great wilderness, and just as likely to be cruel and evil as kind and warm-hearted. Thankfully, Rolf was the latter kind, and ever since Mapeline had found him nosing through the springtime soil in search of roots and bugs and old, forgotten acorns, they had been fast friends. Mapeline was especially glad for Rolf on days like today, far from the new warmth of spring, when snow was on the ground and a cold wind rattled the bare branches overhead. Rolf's den was not nearly as neat and clean as Mapeline's home, as Rolf was not nearly the housekeeper that Mamma Maple was. But tucked down in the dark den, with the smells of the wet dirt and exposed roots and dry grass bedding, and up against Rolf's thick fur, it was about the nicest place Mapeline had ever been. She was almost asleep when Rolf said, "It will be dark soon, Mapeline." "Yes," she said, and though he was right, and she really needed to be heading up the hill to her stand, the thought of leaving this snuggly nest for the blowing cold was not a pleasant one. "Maybe I should just sleep here tonight," she suggested, and closed her eyes again. Rolf grumbled, and the sound was something between a laugh and a growl. "Your parents are not overly fond of me, and would be less fond still if I kept you from home all the winter night long." Mapeline scowled at this, and knew he was right, but did not open her eyes. "And I think your mother is needing your help preparing for Short Day tomorrow." "Humph," Mapeline said in her best talking bear voice. "I much prefer the eating and dancing of Short Day to the cooking and trimming." Mapeline still didn't open her eyes, though now, at Rolf's reminder of her duties for tomorrow's shortest day of the year holiday, she felt a pinprick of guilt and responsibility in her stomach. It is the same, I'm sure, as you feel when your mother has told you to clean up your room and you haven't yet begun, or your father has warned you about eating too many cookies and you find that you've taken 3 or 4 instead of 1 or 2. Still, it was terribly comfortable in the warm dark, and perhaps Mamma Maple wouldn't miss her too much, and— Rolf suddenly stiffened, and then rolled from side to side to get himself to his feet, and Mapeline's mind was made up for her. It was either leave the den or be buried beneath an avalanche of black fur and bare belly. Out she went. Mapeline shivered in the falling snow and thought longingly of the spring, when her hair would grow back with the new buds and blossoms. For now, she quickly pulled her thick hood up over her bald head. Rolf nudged her out farther, and then, after buttoning up her squirrel-skin coat, she climbed atop his back, and they were on their way, trudging up the hill. If you have never ridden on the back of a large black bear through freshly fallen snow, I cannot say that I would recommend it. In your case or mine, it might mean that we were very shortly going to be eaten. But in Mapeline's case, the soft tromp-tromp of Rolf's paws and the warmth of his body as she dug herself deep into his coat made the climb to her home far more enjoyable than walking would have been. As they crested the hill to the flat ground where the trees of Mapeline's stand grew, the sun was just touching the flat western horizon, and the second of 3 moons was just peeking in the east. All 3 would rise this short day, even the little water moon, and would make for a bright night reflecting off all the snow. Still, there was a hustle and a bustle going on as other little tree-born rushed about to make final outdoor preparations before the dim night came upon them. In the open lawn between the circle of home trees, a long wooden table had been set, and nearby was the Short Day pole, strung with rope and colorful dancing flags. There were smells twirling in the cold, sharp air of roasted hazelnuts and simmering squirrel and the last of the year's candied fruit. These smells, to you and me, who were more accustomed to turkey and potatoes and cranberry sauce, would have been pleasant, but a bit odd. To Mapeline, they were the smells of a long-anticipated celebration, the turning of the sun and stars from long winter toward a coming spring. She could not help but smile, even knowing, as she did, that she would be awake for some hours more, helping her mother finish preparing the feast. To Rolf, oh, poor Rolf. You see, however strong and moving these smells might be to you or me or Mapeline, they were doubly strong, triply strong, to the sensitive snout of a bear. In truth, he'd smelled the first hints of beechnut pie all the way down the hill in his dark den, and now, standing so close, it was all he could do to keep his mouth from hanging open and the drool from falling, frozen, to the ground. Mapeline felt his stomach gurgle and growl as she slid from his back. "Mapeline!" The little girl turned to see her mother and father hanging a string of holly berries from the lower boughs of a nearby fir tree. They smiled and waved and smiled again, this time as you might smile when your best friend arrives at a party but has brought their troublesome younger brother with them, or when your sweet aunt and uncle arrive for Christmas but have brought along that cousin who plays rough with your toys and breaks them. "Oh, and hello, Rolf," said Mapeline's mother. "Sorry I'm late, Mama," Mapeline called. "It was so cold today we decided to take a rest in Rolf's den, and I almost fell asleep." "Oh, my. Yes, Rolf's den. Well, I was beginning to worry, Mape, and we need your help cooking tonight. The boys have been out hunting up snowberries and nuts and, Mama trailed off, a half-smile frozen to her face, and Mapeline realized that Rolf had forgotten to keep his mouth closed. He was staring up at the nearest home tree and gaping at the smell of a winter stew that drifted down from one of the rooms. "Rolf!" Mapeline whispered. She elbowed him, and though her elbow didn't reach even halfway up his leg, it was enough to remind him to close his mouth. "You're scaring my mother again." Mapeline's parents were not quite sure what to do about Rolf. It was obvious that Mapeline loved him, and she'd now spent so much time rambling the wilderness with him that they more or less trusted that the bear was safe and would take good care of their only daughter. But Rolf was so big, and bears were usually dangerous. And the fact that he was a talking bear was just so odd. Imagine your own mother or father letting you take a walk down the street with a talking alligator or a singing tiger. It wasn't normal, and so whenever Mapeline talked about Rolf or went off with him on a midday romp down to the river, they felt that confusing feeling inside their stomachs that was a bit like butterflies and a bit like the stomach flu. Rolf pulled his snout away from the smell and found Mapeline's mother staring at him from nearby, and her father, farther back, scowling as he always did when Rolf was around. "Sorry, Mother Maple," Rolf said, and then he tried to smile, but this did not help much. A bear's smile is only slightly less frightening than a bear's snarl, and both show far too many teeth to set anyone at ease. "I was just, enjoying the thought of food. Your food, I mean. The food you are all preparing." "Oh, dear," was all she could say. But then, as Rolf whispered a soft good night to Mapeline and turned to go, Mapeline's mother did something very unexpected. Very unexpected indeed. It was something so unexpected that it took a few moments for everyone to realize what she'd done, and for Rolf to turn back, bushy eyebrows raised, and ask in a very confused, very berry voice, "What did you say, Mother Maple?" "I said, well, I was just thinking that Short Day is such a lovely time, and we always have far too much food, and, Well, if Reed Maple knows anything, he knows the weather, and he said it was shaping up to be especially cold tomorrow, and I know it can be difficult, even for a bear of your, strength, size, to find enough food when it's been so cold. So I was wondering if you might like to join our stand for the holiday tomorrow. Rolf didn't move. Mapeline didn't move. Mapeline's father didn't move, except that his frown grew deeper and his eyes more squinty. Then Mapeline's mother said, "Oh dear," very softly, and tried to pretend she was busy hanging more garland. Mapeline was the first to find her voice. She had been inviting her best friend to join the stand for dinners and celebrations and games ever since she met him, but as it was obvious that his presence made some quite uncomfortable, he always refused. "Rolf, will you come? Please, you must come. It will be the greatest short day ever." Rolf squinted an eye and gave a sort of a growl. Not a real growl, certainly, but a mumbling, rumbling, ruminating kind of growl. He looked over again at Mapeline's father, and then back up at the window of the room from which all the rich, delicious smells were coming. Now, Rolf was a very special bear. Most obviously he could talk, but he was special in other ways as well, some that Mapeline was just beginning to understand, and some of which she had no idea. But mixed up with all that special, there was a part of him that was very much like a regular, walk through the woods and eat honey and scratch your back on a tree bear. And that part had an extremely difficult time saying no to delicious smells and the food they lead to. He said finally, "Thank you, Mother Maple. I think I will come." Mapeline squealed and jumped up as high as she could jump to hug her friend. Her mother said, "Oh dear," again, and her father kept on scowling.
So, Ryan, what do you hope kids take away from reading Mapeline?
Yeah, I've thought about this. It's a little bit difficult, I think, to ask a fiction author what a takeaway is. If I was writing a devotional book, there's a very clear, here's what I want you to learn, A, B, C, D, like a teacher. I think if you try to do that with fiction, it just comes across as fake because a novel does not have the same goals that nonfiction does. I hope they pick it up again in 2 months because it was such a good story that they connected emotionally with the characters that they want to read it again. And they come away with a lasting impression. That's what novels are good at doing. But if kids connect to my stories, they're also going to come away with a very positive vision of a Christian worldview. Christian worldview is woven into this story. It's nothing overt, but I'm a Christian, so that's what comes out. And so the subtle ways family is presented, the subtle ways when someone is doing something wicked, it is addressed. The subtle ways that authority is dealt with in the book, not always as a bad thing.
And the reality is that for different readers, different things are going to stick with them. But if they're emotionally connecting to characters, they're going to be getting some sort of takeaway, even if we can't, as authors, put an exact name on what it, because they might be taking away lots of different things.
Yeah, and I think we often underestimate how much we take away from stories that we could never put our finger on. But you watch a really good story, and the things those characters thought were important seem a little more attractive in the real world. It's also why we as Christian parents need to be aware when we are recommending books to our kids. It's not just the 3 typical things that make something clean that matter. Language and sensuality and violence. You can have something that is very clean in that sense, but is teaching really bad things effectively through a story.
So Ryan has generously offered to give away a copy of Mapeline to our giveaway bundle for the season. So stay tuned for more information later about how to enter to win this giveaway.
How can the adults in the readers' lives connect with you and find your books?
So I have a Facebook author page, just Ryan Southworth Author. Books are all on Amazon. Audiobooks are all the places that audiobooks are. You can get it from the publisher's website as well.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Ice Cream with Authors. I hope you enjoyed our chat and found a new favorite book or author to love. Remember, the adventure doesn't end here. There are always more stories to discover.
If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends. If you want to keep the conversation going, send an email to icecreamwithauthors@gmail.com with your comments or questions. We might respond in an episode to come. Until next time, keep reading and sharing the stories you love.